Folks, welcome to another little video on Luminar, the latest release version 1.20 Neptune. I thought I'd show you a little approach I use for this kind of image. One of my favorite locations in New York City is Top of the Rock. It cost you about 30 bucks, not the cheapest place, but nice outdoor observation deck. If it's not too busy, you can find a place to rest your camera, use a long exposure, nice small aperture, maybe f8, f11, something nice and crisp. Keep your ISO down. You can get a nice, vivid picture. This is a raw image from a couple of months ago. It's from a Fuji X-T2. Images are pretty big, so you'll notice some of the processing time in this demonstration takes a few moments. But there's a lot of data in this raw file, and that's one of the beauties of raw files. There's a lot of data. One of the disadvantages is, as you see right here, it's pretty flat. It's not that interesting. It needs some help. So let's see if we can help it. Let me show you what I do. Maybe it's useful or interesting to you and helps you as you play around with Luminar and see if it works for you. First thing I like to do I have a straight horizon? Are things lined up like they should be? And I think pretty much they are. And that's because I was able to rest my camera on part of the building. The building is straight and level. The earth is straight and level. Everything works. So no issue there. I think the horizon line is pretty good. Let's check color temperature, and I usually find in this kind of image, I've taken this basic shot many times, you can tend to use this building here to give you a good balance point for the white balance, the color temperature. I think that works well, but we can adjust it a little bit if we want something a little different, if we want to tone that down a little bit. It might be wise to bring that back like we did just a little bit. And then I would typically start with this accent AI filter and just kind of shoot it halfway and see what happens. And you'll notice an improvement right away. If we turn the filter off, here's kind of the original. And here we are with the accent AI filter, and definitely makes an improvement. I would think tone it down just a little bit more. This is art, so your judgment, it's very subjective. But I think don't overdo it, but keep it realistic and try to recreate what you saw, or at least what you want other people to see. So this feels about right. Let's go down here to structure, and this will give the image some real crispness. Now watch especially what happens with the clouds. Right now the clouds are pretty flat. There's a little texture over here and out in the distance, but watch what happens when we add some structure. We'll just shoot for right about here. All of a sudden, we've got some really interesting skies. Texture, something interesting to see. Now if you go to the extremes, and this can be useful for figuring out how filters work, well, that's sort of a monstrosity. That's not interesting, it's distracting, it doesn't look realistic. You've never seen that before in your life. Let's keep it real. And so I'd back it off to something in this range. And it's interesting without being distracting, it seems to me. But your judgment. I also like to add just a little bit of clarity. It kind of makes these buildings pop a little more. If you notice, again, go to the extremes and you'll kind of see it. It really makes the edges of the buildings more clear. Keep it realistic. Somewhere down in this area seems about right. And now, as you'll notice, I'm just working my way down through filters. There's many more, but these are the ones that are in my workspace I've set up and saved. And I find if I put them in kind of a sequence I like, and then I just stroll through them, I can move pretty fast. So let's add a little bit of vibrance, just to make the colors a little more vivid. And might even play with the shadows just a bit. Let's see if we boost the, if we were to brighten up the shadows just a bit, that might help this image. Let's check the highlights and see if that does much for us. It's interesting, the highlights don't really do a lot for us. And some images will be that way. So let's leave those pretty much alone. Then finally, I think we'll just bring up the brightness just a little bit. All right? As I do that, I think I'm losing a little contrast in some of these details. I want to back the shadows down. Because what we did was brighten the shadows, but we may have brightened those up just a little too much. So we want some good contrast. We want some vividness, and I think that'll work well for us. Now, two other things I'd recommend we do. Number one, up in the upper right corner, we've got an ugly dust mark. Obviously something on my sensor. I need to take care of that. But for the moment, let's fix it this way, the denoise tool. So we have to give it a moment. It has to take a moment to kind of process the raw file. It's about 50 megabytes it's working on. And then we'll remove that little spot. And you'll see this will blend in quite nicely, and we really won't know it's there. Oh, actually I clicked the wrong tool. This is denoise. That's okay. We'll do it right here. With this image, you can see there is a little bit of noise. We see it here on the left side. And after running the tool, we've eliminated some of that noise. But it's also blurred out the details a bit. So here we have some hard edges, and here it's kind of blended those out. If we come over to some of the structures, we can see it does the similar thing on the building. So notice there's even a little hint of texture. Maybe it's the observation deck at Freedom Tower. But if we use the denoise, we're kind of obscuring that. Now, would anyone notice? Probably not. But why take out details that we worked hard to bring out and to capture? So let's tone down the denoise. And you wouldn't even have to run it for this image necessarily. Let's run it in just a very light fashion. So now we're using the lightest noise reduction. And you see we kept image in this part of the picture. Let's even crank it down a little more just by changing the slider here. And this leaves a touch of noise, but it looks realistic, and it's not all creamy and smeared out. So we're going to click apply on that, and we'll let that do its thing. It'll take it just a moment. Where I had intended to take you was to the erase option, the erase functionality. So there were really two things I thought this image needed. Number one, it needed a little bit of denoise work. Number two, it needs some work on that little dust spot in the upper right corner. Then I think we're in good shape. So we'll give this just a moment to finish up its work, and then we'll resume. Okay, notice that when we run the denoise routine, it creates a new layer. So this layer 0, what we should probably get in the habit of calling this original. Okay, this contains the original image and our adjustments. Here's the denoise layer that lays on top of that. Now let's go to the erase functionality, this tool. So take it just a moment, not quite as long as the denoise function. And then we will work on that little spot. And then we'll talk about and see what we can do about this spot and why would we even want to touch that. Is it a hot pixel or is it something else? Well, first, this little dust spot. Let's make our tool a bit smaller. And all we have to do is really to click on that and click erase. And you'll see that generally it pulls that out, and the result just kind of blends in. Your eye will see it for a moment, and then it often just disappears into the existing texture of the image, in this case the clouds. Now this little spot here, from really being there and being at this location, I know that's an airplane. What happens is the airplanes, the passenger jets, actually fly up south of Manhattan, between Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty, which is right there. They fly up the Hudson River, and they come around behind where you're standing on top of the rock, and they land at LaGuardia. So that's a real airplane, not a hot pixel, but it is distracting. It doesn't really help the image. Let's get rid of it. We don't need people wondering, well, what is that, and did he mean for that to be there? I'd go with a real small brush, just highlight, and hit erase. And that should, if we're lucky, smooth that out rather nicely. Yeah, and you really don't see anything. So now we hit apply, and we're in good shape. So we'll give it just a moment to finish up. And in fact, I think it is finished, and there we go. So let's recap real quick. Our original layer, we set the white balance, we did a little bit with the AI filter, a little structure, clarity, a little vibrance, small tweaking on the highlights and shadows, and just a little bit of brightness for the image. Then a little bit of denoise, which added a denoise layer, and then a little bit of erasing on the dust spot. Now you'll say, why is the dust spot back? Well, it's because it's back, so to speak, because it exists in the original layer, the original image, which we're highlighted on right now. If I come back here to the top layer, you see it's gone. In Luminar, we are looking essentially at the image from up here, looking down through the erase layer, the denoise, to the original, and that's what we're going to save, and that's what we'll export out as a JPEG. So we've got a nice, interesting image. So let's look at where we began. Here's the original. Quite a difference now. A little murky, flat, not much contrast. Nothing terribly interesting. We know it's New York City. That's interesting, but it's a snapshot. But with the changes, we brought something to life. The clouds are kind of interesting, and there's things to look at, and it looks vivid, and it looks like it has a little depth to it. You can argue, and this is where the art comes in, that maybe we need to tone it down a little bit more, and we can do that. Maybe it needs to look a little more realistic, and we can do that. But this is the art side of things, and that's the beauty of it. So that's the way I approach it. Maybe that's interesting for you and helps you in your process, and I'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback, suggestions, criticisms, if you like what you see, thumbs up is great. Subscribe, and I'll keep trying to put a few of these kind of videos out. Hope it helps you just a bit. Have a good one. Take care.